Poland is going through a transformation. After many years of democratic backsliding, Poland has chosen to put itself back on track.
And his return to power is seen as a step forward for Polish democracy. He has vowed to restore the country's position in the EU.
But how and who exactly hijacked Poland's democracy?
They're accused of having transformed state media into propaganda tools aimed to serve the former Conservative government.
This fight with the communist monster was really impossible. We could only fight against it by using its own weapons, because it pretended to be the people's system.
This is the story of Poland's historical struggle with democracy. For one to understand the story of Poland's struggle with democracy, they must first understand its history. And what better place to start than the first Polish Republic, formed in 1569, with the Union of Lublin. Its formation as a union of the crowns of Poland and Lithuania, alongside prior political developments in Poland, contributed to the formation of an elective monarchy, where the nobility elected the monarch. In addition, the nobility of the two crowns formed the parliament, known as the Sejm, which handled legislation of the Commonwealth. The most problematic feature of the Sejm became the liberum veto, a rule which necessitated a unanimous vote for proposals to become law. Originally, this rule came about as a compromise of the 1569 Union of Lublin, as the liberum veto ensured that the Polish crown could not pass laws without Lithuania's approval. The veto's nature would change over the years, as the original purpose of protecting Lithuania against the whims of Poland became increasingly irrelevant through the Lithuanian nobility's conversion to Polish culture. Unlike in Western Europe, where constitutional and absolute monarchy emerged to empower a centralized state, in the Commonwealth, the state suffered further decentralization, as the liberum veto gave way for a single member of parliament to hold the Sejm hostage. By the 18th century, the flawed system allowed for the weak state to be partitioned by its neighbors. And so the first Polish democratic experiment ended in a catastrophic failure of Poland's dissolution, and its less democratic neighbors taken advantage. The Second Polish Republic would be born from the aftermath of the First World War, as the three empires that had partitioned it at the end of the 18th century collapsed into internal conflict. Proclaiming independence in 1918, following the surrender of the German Empire, the reborn Polish nation would spend 3 years in conflict against the Soviets and Lithuanians. Even after the end of the Polish-Soviet War in 1921, Poland would be engaged in continued border disputes with Germany and Lithuania. Following the end of open hostilities in the East, Poland would embark on the construction of a new Second Republic. The new government would pass the March Constitution in 1922, which empowered the parliament and made the president a largely ceremonial role. However, the functioning of the Second Republic would run into trouble as soon as it started. These problems were well evidenced by the assassination of Gabriel Narutowicz, the first elected president of the Second Republic, just 5 days into his presidency. This was followed by continued political ineffectiveness as the government failed to pass laws, due to the right-wing National Democracy and left-wing Polish Socialist parties being fierce political rivals. Following continued political instability and ineffective governance, the war hero Joseph Pilsudski, disillusioned with the failures of the Polish government, as well as fearing the excesses of the conservatives, would in 1926 participate in a coup, which following several days of fighting in Warsaw would result in Pilsudski becoming the de facto leader of Poland. Following his refusal to be appointed prime minister or president, Pilsudski became the Minister of Military Affairs instead. Meanwhile, his new government was filled with his loyal allies, consisting mostly of military personnel. Despite his rule as de facto dictator, Pilsudski had claimed himself to be a Democrat at heart, with him basically working to establish a strong Poland capable of avoiding the failures of his democracy once it was to be eventually reinstated. Whatever his goals may have been, the reality was that with his death, Pilsudski left Poland under an authoritarian regime, limiting political opposition, as well as leaving it with a new constitution, empowering a single man with unrivaled power over the nation. Following the Second World War, as Poland fell under Soviet occupation, the country's pre-war government found itself in exile. As the flaws of the Eastern Bloc's economic system became evident,
the Polish economy was in crisis. There were shortages everywhere. Western loans had been squandered, and the country was burdened by foreign debt.
the resulting continued economic stagnation would contribute to the founding of the trade union named Solidarity, which through civil resistance would begin attempting to advance its causes of workers' rights and social change. The communist Polish government would attempt to destroy Solidarity through instating martial law in 1981.
Solidarity's leaders were arrested. Solidarity was banned. President Jaruzelski declared martial law.
But despite the government's attempts, the movement would endure underground. When Gorbachev rose to power with the Soviet Union in 1985, his promises of change would help bring about hope. These promises would materialize in Gorbachev's lack of reaction to Hungary's reforms, which included free elections, as well as the opening of the Iron Curtain of the border with Austria in May 1989. Gorbachev's decision not to use military force against Hungary's drastic reforms, unlike in 1956, sent a clear signal to Polish leaders of its vulnerable position. With military force and repression not being enough to destroy Solidarity as a movement, and the guarantee of military support from the Soviets now gone, the communist government of Poland agreed to roundtable talks with the opposition starting on February 6, 1989, and lasting until April 5th. The result of these roundtable talks would be the legalization of trade unions, opposition parties, as well as free and fair elections. The subsequent 1989 Polish parliamentary elections would result in Solidarity winning 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate, and the 1990 presidential elections saw Lech Walesa become the first democratically elected president of modern Poland. It was during the decades of Solidarity's organized resistance to communist rule in Poland that two notable figures would begin their political careers. These were Jaroslaw and Lech Kaczynski, who had since the 1970s participated in opposition activities and whose vision would come to define modern Poland. While back in the 1970s, the Kaczynski brothers were just one of many figures in the Polish opposition movement. By the 1990s, their political influence had grown thanks to their alliance with Lech Walesa. Even as the Solidarity movement had been united in its opposition to the communist government, the de facto surrender would begin causing the movement to fracture from within. After decades of suffering repression from the communists, the leniency afforded to many of the communist leaders at the roundtable talks would be a notable point of contention within the movement. The Kaczynski brothers emerged as the head of the more fervently anti-communist branch of the movement. A combination of their criticism towards the result of the roundtable talks, allowing many communist elites to remain in power, and the brothers' alliance with the leader of Solidarity would ensure political influence during the first years of the Third Polish Republic. However, Solidarity's fracturing in 1990, combined with the failure of the brothers' Center Agreement Party to meet the 5% threshold in 1993 to remain in the parliament, would result in the evaporation of their political influence in Poland. The two brothers seemed poised to remain just insignificant politicians at political fringes of Poland, until 7 years later, when in 2000, the right-wing government of Jerzy Buzek faced a reshuffle during which Lech Kaczynski was appointed Justice Minister of Poland. This appointment would contribute to the revival of the brothers' political influence, as the anti-corruption rhetoric of Lech proved popular with Polish society. While Lech's tenure as Justice Minister proved popular, the Law and Justice Party, more commonly known by its abbreviation PiS, was established in 2001, jointly by the two brothers. From the start, the PiS was an anti-establishment party, calling for the creation of a Fourth Republic, which was an idea in Polish politics to reform the Polish Republic into a semi-presidential system from its post-1989 parliamentary one. This was accompanied by the party's desire to cleanse Polish politics, as it rejected the developments in Poland which had taken place following the 1989 roundtable talks. Early PiS wasn't especially concerned with religion, as evidenced by Christianity merely being mentioned by the party, though this would begin to change in 2005. The first notable electoral success of the PiS would be in the 2005 parliamentary elections, where it won 27% of the seats, leading to Jarosław Kaczyński becoming prime minister, while presidential elections in the same year saw his brother elected president, in part carried by his popularity from his time as the justice minister. Thus, in 2005, a remarkable political situation emerged, where two brothers were prime minister and president within the same country simultaneously. As much as Lech was popular, the foundation of PiS was unstable. Besides the PiS, the coalition involved the Ultra-Catholic League of Polish Families and the agrarian syndicalist self-defense parties. With such a diverse coalition, as well as the PiS only making up a third of the parliament, it was not surprising that early elections were called in 2007. Despite the PiS retaining around 30% of the votes in this and the subsequent 2011 election, Donald Tusk's civil coalition would win a majority in the two elections, in part through scaremongering about the PiS, referring to the controversies of its short-lived government. The PiS situation was further worsened by the death of Lech Kaczynski on April 10, 2010, when the plane carrying him alongside Polish government and military officials to commemorate the Katyń massacre crashed in Smolensk. While official investigations concluded that pilot error, organizational failures, and poor weather together were to blame for the crash, Jarosław would blame the Russians for this crash, whose death became part of the PiS internal mythology. While Jarosław would run for president in the 2010 elections following the death of his brother, his lack of popularity and controversial nature would contribute to his defeat to the PO candidate, Bronisław Komorowski. While Jarosław's failed bid for presidency and the Smolensk air disaster that killed his brother weren't on their own the reason for a drastic shift within the nature of the PiS, these two events can still be seen as marking a turning point within the party, most notably the intertwining of Catholicism, describing family as the basic unit of society with unquestionable rights. And from this perspective stems the party's opposition to gender ideology, as well as its opposition to abortion. And perhaps the largest influence on the party's support for religious-based policy was the simple political incentives of the electorate. The desire to gain more votes would push it to court the religious voting bloc by supporting the church. Additionally, the importance of the vote of the Polish farmers through the agrarian syndicalist self-defense party would also influence the PiS support for farmers, whose votes it would also try to court by promising support. With a more consolidated position from religious Poles and farmers, as well as more charismatic members of the party acting as its public face, and the civic coalition's internal problems, in 2015, the PiS would win a majority in the Polish parliament, with Beata Szydło becoming the prime minister, while the presidential elections in the same year saw PiS Andrzej Duda become president. While new people from within the PiS had been elected to rule Poland, Jarosław Kaczynski continued to rule the party from the background, and his desire for power would see the PiS rapidly begin to work to ensure it would retain control over Poland Beginning in November 2015, once the newly formed PiS came into power, using its absolute majority in Parliament, it immediately nullified the appointment of 5 constitutional tribunal judges of the previous PO government, who had the constitutional rights to only appoint 3. Despite only 2 of the appointments being unconstitutional, the PiS would replace all 5 of the judges of the tribunal's 15, including the 3 constitutionally appointed ones. This amounted to blatant court packing. The Constitutional Tribunal to which the judges were being appointed is a judicial institution in charge of resolving disputes on the constitutionality of the activities of other state institutions, meaning it had the power of deciding what was constitutional and could become law. In addition to packing the CT, which is supposed to act as a check to the ruling party, the PiS would, through legislature, begin to strip it of its ability to oppose it. This included raising the number of tribunal votes required to revoke legislation, forcing a delay in deciding a constitutional case, and giving the dissenting minority the right to impede its functioning. The PiS would introduce these amendments without a period between the announcement and implementation of the changes to further hinder any attempts to stop them. The Constitutional Tribunal, aware of the intent to remove its ability to function, would revoke the proposal in March 2016. This was legally a final and irrevocable ruling, but practically the PiS Prime Minister's refusal to publish the ruling rendered it inoperative. The Law and Justice Party effectively neutralized the Constitutional Tribunal, the institution designed to prevent any single party from unilaterally interpreting the Constitution. This action contravenes the principles of separation of powers, which dictates that the judiciary should remain independent of the legislative and executive branches. Furthermore, leveraging its established position, PiS also extended its influence to state media. Based on the justifications of the necessity to rebuild media plurality and the supposed mission of public service providers to uphold national traditions and promote education in history. The PiS would take over the state television and radio by replacing its executive boards and through them converting the state media institutions to an organ of the PiS. The media would transform into a government mouthpiece that praised the PiS, while disproportionately criticizing its rivals. Then, in 2017, thanks to the control of the CT, the PiS was able to erode the separation between the legislature and judiciary through passing a bill which allowed the politicians of the legislature full control over the appointment and promotion of judges. But then the PiS would overplay its hand by proposing the removal of all the sitting judges of the Supreme Court, an unprecedented move that was seen by many as an attempt to consolidate power by further undermining judicial independence. The public outcry over the egregious law was severe enough that the PiS president, Andrzej Duda, vetoed the bill, and in September 2017, he proposed new bills. These new bills included the removal of a more sensible 40% of the Supreme Court judges, including the president. As a result of this, the Supreme Court, as well as the National Council of the Judiciary, were filled with people appointed by the PiS, either through replacing judges who had been removed or the creation of new positions, like in the Supreme Court. These judicial reforms together eroded the independence of the judiciary, which in a democratic state is supposed to be subservient to the Constitution rather than a single party. It was as the result of the PiS reforms, converting the judiciary in practice to a tool of the party, which prompted the European Union to take action against the PiS-led government. As the independence of the judiciary is one of the values enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union. Thus, it put into effect Article 7 to strip Poland of its voting rights in the EU for violating the rule of law, agreed as one of the EU's founding values. Unfortunately for the EU, Hungary, with Fidesz under Viktor Orban, blocked it from coming into effect via its ability to veto this law, which required unanimous support, excluding the country being targeted. So the two regimes ended up scratching each other's backs. As much as the PiS enjoyed a comfortable position with the Polish judiciary having been subjugated to the party, its rule was not absolute. After 2017, judicial reforms eventually left the Polish judiciary, in practice an extension of the PiS, similar to the state broadcasting service. A period of political stability would follow in Poland, with the 2019 parliamentary election resulting in the PiS retaining its dominant position, while the Civic Coalition conversely continued losing seats in the government. The following years would be marked by much more chaos. The re-election of President Andrzej Duda in 2020 was expected to ease political tensions in Poland. However, Kaczynski opted to make changes to the government after the elections. At the same time, some PiS members began to take a stand that seemed independent of the party line. A notable incident was when Justice Minister Zbigniew Ziobro announced his ministry's plan to have Poland withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, a European treaty aimed at preventing domestic violence. This declaration was quickly addressed by a government spokesperson who clarified that such a withdrawal was not an official government policy. The internal strife within PiS became more apparent when Ziobro's party members were barred from appearing as guests on the state-run news channel in July 2020. This conflict within the ruling party led to the resignation of several ministers before the anticipated government reshuffle took place. The PiS's already tense coalition would face division from within when Jarosław Kaczyński pushed for an animal rights bill banning fur farming and religious slaughter of animals. While Kaczynski's love for his cat was a big motivator for his adamant support for the bill, his party was less enthusiastic. While Ziobro found no trouble in opposing Kaczynski following the infighting of the summer, fur farmers in the PiS traditional voting base of eastern Poland would also oppose the bill. In turn, Kaczynski, in a rare move, turned to the opposition to help him pass the law, with Kaczynski forming an unholy alliance with the Greens. But the biggest upset of all was to come soon after, when on October 22, 2020, the Constitutional Tribunal, under the control of the PiS, passed a ruling to ban abortion in spite of 79% of Poles opposing the ruling. Poles would come to the streets en masse in the largest protests in Poland's history since the fall of communism in 1989. These protests, however, were not just about banning of abortion, but how the ruling was passed undemocratically against the will of the people through the PiS's unconstitutional control of the judiciary. When the Poles went to the polls on the 15th of October 2023, the consequences of the years of PiS rule and its results for Poland was visible in the overwhelming number of young Poles desiring to live under a European democracy with rule of law rather than an authoritarian party state, similar to Hungary. Despite the PiS remaining the largest singular party, it would fail to form a coalition government and would take more than a month for a new government to be formed. The new coalition government of Donald Tusk faces a daunting task as it tries to wrestle away the PiS's influence from where it doesn't belong. Already it has acted to remove its control over the state media, though this has led to legal controversy in its approach. The question facing the new Polish government is daunting. How does one fix a broken system legally when it was broken illegally? And will all of this lead to a more democratic Poland? That remains to be seen. Next, watch my video on Polish-Russian wars to understand the background to the current tensions in Europe. And this is my Patreon map. Everyone on this map contributes to this channel directly, and I'm massively thankful to each and every one of you. Your perspective out.